We hear a lot about Sinn Féin being the party of change, and that may well be true, but nobody ever stops to ask what sort of change Sinn Féin might actually represent. This is Ben Scallan and you're watching Gript Media. As people become increasingly sick of the political establishment, voters are understandably crying out for change. The last election showed that people are sick to their back teeth of leaders like Leo Varadkar and Micheál Martin, and for good reason. These men are seen as pandering, politically correct, empty suits who chase trends mindlessly in the pursuit of votes. And as we know from recent polling, a vast majority of Irish people are sick of political correctness. People have had enough and they want something different. Because of this new division that's forming, at first glance, Irish politics seems very divided. We see the intense back and forth in the Dáil between the people in power and the opposition parties like Sinn Féin.
Mary Lou, look, stop. I didn't interrupt you. I wanted to talk to you about corporation tax.
Okay, thank you. You're going to mansplain corporation tax.
Well, Pierce Doherty
Looking at all this, one would be forgiven for thinking that voters had a wide array of choices when we went to the ballot box. But is that really the case? On the issues that really matter, how much do our politicians actually disagree on? Let's take immigration as an example. Is there a single big party in the Dáil which isn't in favour of mass open borders immigration? For one, we know that Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Greens are all proposing to give legal status to 17,000 illegal immigrants. Bear in mind, we're not talking about refugees here. We're not talking about asylum seekers fleeing war and persecution. We're talking about people who illegally entered the country and broke Irish immigration law. And yet Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Greens want to reward these people by letting them stay in the country. This policy is tantamount to open borders. If there's no consequence for breaking the law, then the law might as well not exist. They're giving a blank check to encourage anyone in the world to hop the fence because everyone knows there's no consequence for doing so. You'll be rewarded with a pat on the head. It's completely outrageous, of course, but while this may shock you, here's the part that many people don't know. Sinn Féin, the so-called party of change, supported a worse version of the exact same policy. The current Irish government wanted to give legal status to 17,000 illegals, but Sinn Féin supported giving it to 26,000. So in other words, the same bad policy, only more extreme. One has to ask, why would a supposed opposition party like Sinn Féin not push back against a radical government policy like this? Why are they going even further than Fine Gael down the path of lunacy? But sadly, it gets worse. Let's take a look at the so-called non-binary education. In case you don't know, a non-binary person is someone who doesn't identify as either male or female. They identify as something else entirely. Well, many people were furious that Fine Gael wanted to let children under 16 legally change their gender. They wanted to let kids identify as the opposite sex or a third gender on their official passport. I did a video on it at the time pointing out the absurdity of this policy. I mean, after all, would you want your child to be able to legally change their gender? Most people would say no, but many people don't know that this policy was first proposed by Sinn Féin. They wanted to let kids change their gender just as much as Leo Varadkar did. In fact, Sinn Féin even suggested letting children take their parents to court to let them change their gender if the parents didn't give consent. Once again, Sinn Féin and Fine Gael are of a like mind on this issue. Then we have controlled speech legislation. Fine Gael came under fire last year for proposing so-called hate speech laws. Now, as I argued at the time, everyone is against hate and racism, obviously. Nobody likes it that other people say nasty and horrible things, but the idea that the government will be able to legislate what is and isn't hateful and decide which opinions we can legally express is a recipe for totalitarianism. Several public protests making that exact point were held outside the Dáil last year. But for some reason, Sinn Féin were there at a counter-demonstration against the protesters alongside a load of government-funded NGOs and similar groups in front of the Dáil. So in other words, Fine Gael proposes laws to control your speech, and when ordinary citizens turn out in the streets to object, Sinn Féin sides with the Fine Gael government. Even their politically correct rhetoric is similar.
And I always say, the biggest parade that happens in Northern Ireland isn't orange or green, it's rainbow coloured. And it was really great to see it today.
Ireland's no longer simply orange and green. Ireland is a rainbow of identities and cultures.
They even supported water charges in 2015 in the European Parliament while claiming to oppose it back home in Ireland. Here's Sinn Féin MEP Lynn Boylan in the EU Parliament asking to add an amendment in the Right to Water bill which involves a progressive charge for water.
We've sent to the Tabling Committee that we wanted to put forward an oral amendment for paragraph 92. And the oral amendment is that calls on the Member States to introduce, in accordance with World Health Organization guidelines, a pricing policy by the application of a progressive charge that safeguards people's right to access a minimum quantity of water for living and reduces waste.
Grazie onorevole.
Now, did you catch that? You can rewind it if you don't believe me. A pricing policy by the application of a progressive charge for water. What is that other than water charges? In fact, we've heard very little, if anything, from Sinn Féin about Fine Gael's attempts to destroy historical statues around the country. Shouldn't a nationalist party stand up for the nation and its heritage? They'll demonstrate for trendy BLM causes in another country, but where is the action when our own heritage is under threat from Leinster House? I don't know about you, but I think I'm starting to notice a pattern. It seems like if Sinn Féin do represent a change, it might not be the kind of change we want in this country. As concerned citizens, we should ask them to clarify their positions on these issues. Ask your local Sinn Féin representative, do you support giving legal status to illegal migrants? Do you support gender changes for children under 16? Are you going to be supporting hate speech legislation that takes away voters' rights to express themselves? Because if the answer to any of those questions is yes, it's pretty clear where they stand. If you like this commentary and you want to see more like it, please be sure to share this video and let us know how you feel in the comments below. Thanks for watching.